Okay, for those of you that missed Wednesday, I did want to make sure you understood media queries really well. So if you look at our assignment where you're going to be making the design principles.html page, you're going to pick 3 of these principles that you've learned about from an earlier activity that you can just read through. And you're going to be finding websites that do a good job with 3 of those different. So if he thinks that this Millhaven website did well with repetition, so he's got that. But you can do all that on your own. These are just screenshots of the phone-sized website that you actually make a screenshot and then save that image and put it in your images folder. If you need help, we can look at that on Friday. But I want you to understand that he's got this small view, this medium view, and then he's got this large view. So it goes from 1 column to 2 to 3 on the larger screen. And what's different with this class is we're going to start doing mobile first. So we're going to be doing the CSS for a mobile page first. So for example, if I was looking at my page, let me refresh that, and I had started my main.css, oops, no media queries yet. We would just go through and I would just make my fonts look pretty. I'd make things centered. I might have a gray background, whatever. I've commented out the media queries because they're not there yet. So you're just going to make it look good for how it would look on a phone. And you can really even open up this emulator and look at a phone. So maybe a little phone here, just to see how it's going to look on a phone. So there's no grid because everything's just going straight down the page. We just did a lot of centering, maybe a little bit of padding. But pretty, not too much, maybe a font came in, I've got a background color here, that kind of stuff. So we're going to be designing for mobile first, meaning we're going to design the main CSS to just be for a phone. Then we use media queries so that when it gets so big, so maybe at this point, right, when my pixels that you can see up there in the upper right, in this area right here, while I'm dragging, you can say, okay, when I get to about, maybe 700 or 800, I could probably start putting 2 columns in because I'm getting a lot of white space on either side here. So I might go to and add a media query. So we did look at what media queries were. So you could go to W3 Schools and just type in media query. And it does bring up the app media rule. Or you could look at this responsive web design, either one of those, or this one's media queries, any of those. And it would go in and it would show you the syntax that you would need in order to do that. So for example, here's this, at media screen and min at 860. So what this is saying is when the screen is at a minimum of 480, then run this code that's in between this and this curly brace. And if you've already got a background color on your body, then it's going to change at that size. So when it gets to a certain size, see right there, 480, it changes to light green. Or red, sorry, pink. So that was pink, and when the minimum, see I'm going backwards, the minimum was 180, then it's going to change. It's going to override this one with this one. Okay, so what we're saying is when we want our 2 columns to show up, we're going to start with, I'll start with just 1 for now. Let me take off this. We're going to say, okay, when ours gets to 700, then instead of whatever we had for main up here, in fact, we didn't even have a main, we're going to set this up to be a grid at this point and make it 2 columns. And I did put a grid gap in here. I did play with the width of the image. You don't have to, though. That's not a necessary thing that you have to do. So now when I am at, what did I say? Just say it was? Sorry. 700, it should change. So if you watch my pixels up there, at the minimum of 700, when it gets right there, it pops to 2. And I did kind of play with the width so they were a little smaller, but you don't have to. You could have waited till it was 900 and had the same size picture. So that's up to you. But mainly it's just turning on those 2 column grid. is all we did. And really the bulk of the CSS is still up there in the main with mobile first. And then for the large screen, you do the same thing, but this time we're going to want 3 columns, and we're waiting until it's 1,000. And you'll watch when it hits 1,000, it will pop into 3 columns. So I really didn't have to add a whole lot of CSS. Maybe I'm thinking now these might be too small, so you could always go in and put in, you know, maybe I want an H1 to be a little bigger at this point, and the font size would be, you know, bigger. So there are other things you could do. That's really big, but you could make whatever rules you want. Maybe that wasn't big enough. I don't know. Do I even have an H1? Yes, design principles. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. But it was this that would have jumped. Let me just look at it again. Yeah. So did you see how design principles jump up? So that got a little bigger. Anyway, so there's things you can play around with other stuff if you want, but really it's just those 2 and 3 columns that we need. Now he went a step further, and instead of having it all in one CSS file, he had, I think on his video, Brother Blazard's video, he had small, whoops, and large. And then he would take this media query out of here, and he would make a new, where are we at here? Main. Okay, CSS. See, he'd make a new file there called medium. And he would just put that one media query in there. Then he'd do the same thing for large. And then he would put this media query in the large. I think it's definitely overkill for this assignment because it was such a small CSS file. But if you had a really big, long CSS, this actually is kind of nice to have them separated. But when you're ready to publish your website and it's all done, I would still bring them all back into one CSS because it always takes more overhead and load time to run more than one if you've got 3 files versus 1. You could even minimize it and it would be really fast. But while you're designing, that's fine to have 3 separate ones. But you're welcome to leave it all in one CSS as well. I don't care either way for this assignment. Maybe for your chamber page, you're going to see the value of putting it in 2 different ones because it'll have a much longer CSS file. So anyway, just a different way he kind of did that there. But hopefully that kind of helps. So just make sure you look up that syntax for how you start a media query. And remember, it's not going, none of this is going to run or actually apply to your elements until your screen is at a certain width. And you can use min or max, whatever makes sense to you. Then whatever's here is going to override the same exact main, if you had it up above, the same exact image that you might have had up here. So I had a display block margin 0 auto, but then I'm going to add these 2 at only when it's this size. So you don't have to repeat anything you already have up here, just what you want to change, just the new stuff. So we just changed, here, and then all I had to do was change that one thing in here. Okay, I hope that helps you kind of get a start with media queries. We've got all day Friday to go over it as well. But that's kind of what we covered on Wednesday.